Right, that should be working now. Seems like everything's working. Seems everything's good. Right, so last time I did all the way from Artificer all the way to Monk. A couple of things I didn't mention last time when I was doing Monk was, well, doing all of them really, was that I feel like it's worth mentioning their spell list a bit. Because I didn't really go into much detail about what they specifically get. So I'll just do a quick rundown. Artificers, they get a bit of everything really. But the fucking hell, why does that make so much a loud noise? That's well, fair enough. Um, they get a jack of all trades kind of spell list as well, which is decently worth mentioning. Um, as you can see, if you look at the spell list as soon as it loads. Anyway, well, if it does load, it's got a load of like cure wounds, for example, so healing spells that you could get in a cleric. It also has stuff like attacking spells, poison sprays mentioned here, but like other stuff. Like I'm pretty sure it gets, yeah, look, acid splash, all of these different cantrips. But if you look at just the base stuff, you've got cure wounds, very useful, especially with a spell storing thing. But you also have utility spells like create bonfire, create food and water, even stuff like continuous flames used quite well in utility. But you also have like, as if you're a cleric, you have stuff that's related to concentration and stuff, decent amount of damaging spells. It's kind of a jack of all trades. And with Bard, it focuses quite heavily on just utility. That's one of the biggest problems, honestly, with it, is that it can be stuck in terms of spells that are related to fighting a monster, if that makes sense. A lot of people are stuck with just spells that either work out of combat or just work on a human. You can see a lot of out of combat stuff in stuff like Disguise Self, Dispel Magic is also in there, Dream. But they can come, depending on what subclass you take, of course, you can be stuck with not a lot of actual stuff you can use against monsters. Cleric, basic overview. It's very similar to Druid, and it'll have a lot of spells that are concentration and a lot of healing spells. That's basically it. I'm just going to do a brief overview because I have already done them and go back to the one I'm actually on. Paladin. Paladin's a very interesting class. I've played one kind of briefly. It was only really I think it was only like 3 or 4 sessions, but I quite like it. I kind of think when you're figuring out whether you what you want to play and you want to play a fighter, if you can come up with a reasonable reason he's a paladin, you'll find yourself feeling better in combat. It was fun, the paladin party. Um, but most of the time, the paladin's the better of the two. So let's just go briefly through all of its abilities and stuff. Notably, D10, very much better than the average. The average obviously being D8. The Divine Sense. Now this spell initially, well, it's not a spell, it's a feature, but it you'd expect it not really to come up a lot of the time. At least I definitely thought it would never come up. But the longer I've played, the more I've realised that this spell, especially if you've got a DM that like knows about your abilities and wants you to be able to use them, it will come up a lot. And it can be quite useful because it can be used to find out kind of like the attitude of the place you're going into. The place is like desecrated. You probably know that the people in there aren't going to be that particularly good. And the fact that it's just a free thing you get, it'll come up, honestly. Do not sleep on this ability. Lay on Hands, kind of one of the main abilities of the Paladin. It's quite useful. Obviously, it isn't a bonus action, which means that you are, if you use it in combat, giving up your turn. But most of the time, the uses that I've seen for it has been just as a big bulk heal after a fight. If you don't want to short rest, or you don't have the ability to short rest, having somebody that can have, upwards of like later levels 50, like if you're level 10, you've got 50 points of healing you can give out. And being able to neutralize diseases and poisons does come up like a not small amount of time as well. Divine Smite, it's kind of the big ability of the Paladin. You sacrifice one of your spell slots, deal a bit of extra damage. Biggest thing about this ability, you can expend it after you know you've hit. That can fundamentally change like a combat, frankly. Because what a lot of people do is they'll wait for a crit, they'll pop their Divine Smite, and then they've effectively got double the... it's like you're casting it at a higher level, because you get double of it. And so this is the kind of... Even though Paladin's one of the tankiest classes, because of the heavy armor, the high health, all of these abilities that you'll see that mitigate damage or allow you to play like a tanky style, Divine Smite is the reason why it can keep up with any other class, really, in damage. Obviously, it falls behind Paladin, falls behind all spellcasters, but it's probably the most damaging martial class. In terms of pure fighting, it's probably the most powerful. You could argue in long-term battles that a rogue is better, but in just terms of burst, Divine Smite makes it so that the Paladin's probably the best. Fighting styles are quite interesting. Came up obviously more in the fighter part of this, but they get a decent amount of fighting styles as well. They also get a couple that are unique to it, like... actually, maybe they're not unique, never mind. But they're pretty decent. Defense always is just a base one that you can take, gives you +1 AC. A lot of the time you will be using a shield. The basic build is heavy armor, shield, and then another weapon. You can play it other ways, but that's what I've seen as the basics. Oh, is it? Oh, that's unique. Interesting. I mean, it makes sense for them to have that. Having access to cleric spell cantrips doesn't seem bad. I don't feel like I'd be taking that one that much though. Blind fighting seems decent though. Having blind sense just for like invisible enemies that do come up a fair amount, or just people who like to hide, isn't that bad. Dueling, also a decent one. If you're planning on going... If you're going sword and shield, but you already feel like you're tanky enough, taking dueling isn't bad, because, a shield isn't a weapon. Great weapon fighting's decent if you're going to go with the more damage variant of it, just going full in with like a heavy weapon. Interception, I've seen it used. It's actually quite good in combat. Same sort of with protection, although I haven't seen protection being used much, but being able to reaction disadvantage people isn't that bad. Second level is when you get access to spells, so obviously the class isn't really a class until you get to at least second level, but I'd argue many classes aren't really their class until they get to their subclass. This Paladin spell list, it's interesting. It's mostly just... It's very similar to the Ranger spell list, not in like what it gets, but in like what it's trying to do. So you've got all of these smites, and the smites are just not better versions of Divine Smite, because you kind of have to anticipate that you're going to hit them and put this on, then do an attack, but they're more powerful versions of it. Although a lot of them actually got buffed in the Unearthed Arcana, so they're not, obviously weren't considered particularly powerful, but generally the spell list is decent amount of utility. Detect magic's always good. Detect poison's always good. Dispel evil and good is really good. Um, but a lot of buffs for yourself, and then like occasionally AOE buffs. Um, yeah, it's got a solid spell list, but realistically, you will not be using this that much because a lot of them will go into Divine Smites. I think occasionally, maybe in combat, you might use a Cure Wounds, but I've found that a lot of the time you're just using them for Divine Smites, which isn't bad because it's a lot of damage. It's kind of like mitigating damage by killing them. Divine Health, this, again, one of those abilities that's a bit of a sleeper. You think it will never come up, but you'll be surprised how much I've seen it come up. A surprising amount of times I've been like, God, I wish I had immunity to disease at the moment. Sacred Oath, this is where the class actually makes the oath. In my opinion, this should be level 1. I think realistically, if I'm a paladin, I should be making the oath immediately. That's how I've become a paladin. If I'm using a weapon and I'm having access to divine spells at level 2 without even me making my sacred oath, narratively that doesn't make sense to me. Now you can sort of flavor it in a way where like you you've made the oath, but this is where it's like kind of confirmed and you get your full like connection with the kind of oath you do, or your oath is a bit wishy-washy at the start and then through time you've cemented what kind of oath it'd be. But this is the reason why, well, one of the reasons why I always think that starting at level 3 is better than starting at level 1. Now, I'm not going to go through all the subclasses because honestly I might save doing subclasses for a different video. Tell you what, I'm going to do this just so you don't have to look at all those adverts. But I feel like generally the subclasses of this are really good. They fundamentally change the class in a decent amount. Not to the level I think that, say, like Cleric does or Druid does, but still in a decent way. Like Ancients, you become really, really tanky. Like Watchers ones, from what I've been told, are really interesting. I've seen like Glory. Glory's quite good. All of them, they just change the class like just kind of like what you want to specialize into. You remember how I was talking literally a couple of seconds ago about sword and the different styles you can play, like sword and shield, like 2 weapons, focusing more on tanking, focusing more on damage. The subclasses very much make it kind of don't make the decision for you, but definitely help you in sort of what kind of way you want to play. Also, notable thing that you get from, I'm assuming all of these just come from Tasha. Yeah, all of these, this optional rule that comes from Tasha allows you to use your Channel Divinity to get back a spell slot. This has come up before. I didn't think it would come up before because normally Channel Divinities are quite powerful. Like the Channel Divinity on my Cleric I played was this big AoE that it did a decent amount of damage. But this does come up more. It helped in one of my previous sessions. Just have an extra level 3 or like just an extra spell. It actually helps just for like healing and stuff. Ability score improvement, pretty self-explanatory. Martial versatility. Talked about this with the fighter. I'm a big fan of any optional rules that allow you to change stuff around on the fly, because you can always have those situations where you've gone fully into the, say, sword and shield angle, and you just don't feel like you're doing a lot of damage. And so what you do is you go, okay, well, I don't particularly like this tanky mode of it, so instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to go fully into 2-weapon fighting. or like sorry, two-handed weapons. So I got to be specific on that. But that one gives you a lot more damage, but you lose out on the AC bonuses. But maybe that's just where you want to go, and so you want to be taking the fighting style that is suited to your fighting style. So you want to have this, the re-rolling of ones and twos in your damage. So I quite like any of these. I talked about it with the cantrip versatility, and I think the same with this one, frankly. Um, Actually, going back to this breaking the oath thing, I haven't seen this come up much, but it is a cool narrative tool. So are the oaths, actually. Having a strong oath, I feel like it gives your character. I've talked about this with other ones, but like stuff you can do that are role playing elements. Like with the cleric, bringing in your god, having it where you have the person question their views, or you see a side of your god that you hadn't seen before, is this cool narrative thing that comes from the class inherently. Same with the oaths. Have it where you take what they have as an oath, and then you start spinning it so that they have to do decisions that aren't necessarily good, but they have to because they're the oaths. It's it's kind of like it mentions it here, but like a lesser of two evils. Having somebody who's like, well, I don't fight somebody, I only kill somebody who's done like a crime, but this person hasn't done a crime. He's insinuated to people that they should, but he never says that he's never orders them, and they did it all of their own free will. But realistically, this guy's evil, and you can't do anything about it because that's not within your oath. And having them like have this like sort of moral dilemma with their oath, because this isn't something you can change easily. You can't have one of those oaths, in my opinion, where you're like, okay, well, because I realised this new thing, I'm just going to change my oath casually. That just doesn't feel right, in my opinion. So maybe you can have like a big narrative thing of them completely changing their oath, but this and having it where you are in this sort of like moral dilemma, I feel like is a really cool narrative tool. Uh, Extra attack, basic thing, always good, allows you to keep up. There's only one martial class that doesn't get this, and there's a good reason why it doesn't get it. Um, yeah, basic thing. Aura of Protection's quite interesting. This is where you get a lot more of the protection aspect. I know it's called Aura of Protection, so of course it's protection, but the more like AoE sort of utility thing. This is one of the ones that is initially you're like, why would I take charisma? It's used on spells, but a lot of the time you're casting them on yourself, so it doesn't really matter. This is where I felt like, okay, this is why I take charisma. So it gives people within 10 feet of you, friendly people, bonus to their saving throws equal to their charisma modifier. So although you don't have evasion, you can have someone here who's narratively kind of protecting the other people near him, which is quite cool. It buffs to 30 feet later on, where you can like narratively it doesn't work as well that your character's sort of putting him in the way of it, but early on it does work. Awe of Courage. I'm not going to talk about these because obviously I'm not talking about subclass features, and ability score improvements are kind of basic. You're not one of those classes that can really take a lot of feats if you want high stats, not like a fighter or the one we haven't talked about yet, Rogue. So most of the time you're probably using these on ability score improvements. At least I am a lot of the time. But I mean, you occasionally could get a feat in there. It depends if people in your group allow for like free feats and stuff. I think it just adds a lot more uniqueness to your character. So you can have two people who are playing the same class and even playing the same subclass that could be unique because they're basing it on their feats. The problem with it is it doesn't. It can be a bit more powerful, and there are some feats that are very powerful. Off the top of my head, sharpshooter. Awe of courage. This is pretty decent. Like frightening someone, it might come up. There is that always that worry though that whether intentionally or not, whoever you have as a DM, um, just stops giving frightening as a thing because they can see that you can just make people immune to frighten. I don't know if it'll always. I don't know if it'll necessarily happen, but I mean, I can see the reason I'm saying is because I could see a situation where maybe unintentionally I'm like, okay, well this creature, I could give it frighten, or maybe I just don't even think about when I'm creating a creature giving it abilities that frighten you because I'm like, well, it's never gonna work. I don't think they do it maliciously, but I could see that coming up. 11th level, kind of just a basic thing that you'll get with a lot of these martial classes. Normally it comes from the subclass actually, and normally a lot earlier, but it's kind of just the generic give you a little bit of extra damage, but it's elemental. But yeah, this one, whenever you hit a creature, they take a little bit extra damage. It helps you keep up, but as I've said before with martial classes, they don't really keep up. It's a problem that I feel like anyone who plays D&D will tell you, is that martial classes do fall behind the higher level you get, even with these little bonuses. Cleansing Touch. This is an interesting ability. I haven't actually I haven't had any experience with this ability. Use an action to end one spell on yourself or one willing creature that you touch. That is interesting. I think it could come up a decent amount if you're dealing with a very powerful, like, magic caster as your boss. And a lot of big bosses will be magic casters in some capacity. And if they plan on, like, cursing you or debuffing you in some capacity, spending one of your turns to allow another person, say your wizard or something, an actual turn where they're not like inhibited by a curse or something, because they can casting bestow curse is something that you could see happening. I could see that being a decent use of this. Also, I think now that I think about it more, it could be used a lot more in out of combat situations. If you have a situation where, like, somebody, I'm bringing up cursing again, but curses are a lot more likely out of combat, and so like you're dealing with someone who has a curse, and it's just like, I touch you, I get rid of your curse that meant you could never see, and it's like you can see again. Obviously, if you're a DM, you put limitations on this. If it's a curse that's maliciously been put on by like an archfey, and they've put multi layers to it, you'd probably just go, yeah, you got rid of the curse for like a second, and then it was reapplied because of the way it's done. You'd probably put a limiter on that. But it would be cool if you were playing this to allow somebody to, like, get use out of this ability. I think that's a big thing that will come up with any of these classes. All of these abilities are, to a certain extent, controlled by how much your DM allows you to use them. So, for example, don't get me wrong, I've never DM'd, but for example, if, say, you're playing a paladin and you're playing a campaign and you just never come across hallowed ground or desecrated ground, you never like are in a situation where this ability can come up in any capacity. then you're going to feel like this is the worst ability ever. Whereas if you have a campaign where occasionally, just every so often, you're trying to look for a fiend, you're trying to look for an undead, and this ability comes in handy, you'll think, oh, this is a perfect ability. So, to a certain extent, every bit of my review you have to take with a little pinch of salt, in that you have to always, for one, it's just the ramblings of me at the end of the day. But in addition, you're in a situation where you're kind of being dictated by the DM. And so these abilities, even the ones I think are really good, they could just never come up like in your whole campaign, and you will think that that ability is like the worst ability ever. Overall, Paladin, I love Paladin. It's the closest I feel like you can get to the power level of like the magic casters without being a magic caster yourself. Like I know you're a half caster, but the way you use them feels more like you're just like a fighter in like a normal RPG, where like weirdly they'll have like they'll do like a flame sword attack and just randomly their sword will turn on fire because they want it visually to look good, and compared to like a wizard who's shooting fireballs, a dude who just does a horizontal slash doesn't look good. So this is I feel like really really good. Um, I'm biased because I have played it before, but I think this one's up there. There's not much I really would change with this, other than the general buff to martial classes that are needed. Like as I mentioned with the fighter and the barbarian, the fighter, for example, I feel like needs to be changed more than just to make it more powerful. It also needs to be changed in the abilities it gets. I always bring up my suggestion of giving the battle master abilities to uh, just inherently to fighters, just to give them more stuff they can actually do. And I feel like that's true for a lot of martial classes, but I think this one's the closest to having enough to do with the access to spells and everything. Whereas the fighter, there's so many times where you're just doing basic attack and you're just sitting there watching as your warlock buddy or your sorcerer buddy is shooting uh, balls of fire, rays of frost, sprays of poison, and you're just going basic attack, basic attack, basic attack. And that's very true for a fighter, and you can sort of get around that with feats, taking a load of feats that give you cool, unique stuff you can do. And with the battle master, but you can't with barbarian. It's why I think barbarian's the mechanically worst class, because it has one thing, it's rage, it's all encompassing, and there's nothing else to it. Anyway, I'm going sidetracking onto things I've already talked about before. Next is Ranger. Now, Ranger, as you can see when you're looking at this, it has a load of freaking abilities. And that's mainly because before, it was generally considered the worst class. I think now it's probably. I think, like, mechanically, all the martial classes are going to be worse than spellcasters. I think this one is better than Barbarian, better than Fighter, better than Monk. I think the Paladin and Rogue are better than Ranger at this point, mechanically. And that's really it. It's really bumped up on the like the Martial tier list. Obviously, after Martial is just all the other full casters. But basic ability, favored enemy. Allows you to choose a type of enemy, all of these kinds of things. This is very much when you talk with your DM and you say, hey, you don't have to tell me everything, obviously, because that would be ruining the whole story, but please tell me which one of these is never going to get any use. Like, there's a thing in in the Solasta game, where in that you have a load of languages and and if you went Ranger, a load of these to choose from. But with the languages and with the beast choosing, there is, like, if you click one of them and it's not going to appear in the campaign, it will just say, hey, this won't appear in the campaign. So you kind of have to ask that from your DM. And there is a chance you just go, well, narratively, I know it won't come up a lot, but my family was killed by a giant ooze. I was killed by a humongous ooze. It rolled over my whole village, burned everyone with acid, and so I have a strong hatred of oozes. And I'm always hunting oozes. I know you're not going to show them ever, but for narrative reasons, I'm taking this. And that's fine. Just know that you'll never use this ability because of that. That's just what's going to happen. A notable one that I didn't even see until I think my second time looking at a ranger is this humanoid one. Now this has a load of potential because you can kind of change your ranger into more of like a vengeful hunter, like a vengeful kind of like this vengeful vigilante, for example. You can go like, oh, my parents were killed by this ruthless gang of mostly orcs, and you go, so I choose orc, and this group had a couple of I don't know, bugbears on their team, and so you go, I choose orc and bugbear, and it's like, well, that narratively makes a load of sense. The ability itself, it's not bad. Gives you advantage in effectively tracking them. And intelligence checks to recall stuff, which can be kind of good. That one probably comes up a decent amount. And this one probably, if I'm being completely honest, comes up maybe twice. It's probably not coming up much. This is quite good. Gets you an extra language. Can be a bit weird when you're choosing like ooze, for example, or plant. But I mean, maybe they took sylph. I don't know. This just says you can choose another enemy later on. That's a decent narrative thing. For example, I remember when I was playing Lus, I narratively, when I got to that level, I chose undead because what I'd been fighting for most of the time was undead. And even though that wasn't necessarily what I was going to be dealing with in the future, if you look at that kind of stuff, you're like, well, if I'm been fighting undead both before and during the time skip, why wouldn't I take undead? Favored foe is the optional feature that Tasha gives. This is interesting because I think it's the first instance of this where they went, okay, we understand that the 5th edition Ranger is bad, and so we're going to fundamentally have an ability that switches out for it. You can occasionally see this in the Cleric. There's a one you can take where it's like, instead of taking Blessed Cantrips, I think it's called, that allows you to put your proficiency on your cantrips, you can take Divine Strike, which is similar to that Paladin ability we just saw, but it's just a first instance of damage, does an extra bit of damage. I'm thinking of that on the top of my head, so it could be completely wrong, but I remember something similar. But this is the first major change to it. So this is instead of the favored enemy. You take the favored foe. Now with this one, instead of you having to choose a specific type of enemy, you hit a creature and you effectively mark the creature, and that becomes your favored enemy. So it's a very much like a single target kill ability. It's like a spell, which is quite interesting. You don't get that a lot with features, where you can, it seems like you can get hit out of it. But it just means you've marked them, you can increase that damage by, when you hit somebody with an attack, has a mark on it, you increase it by 1d4. Kind of like a hunter's mark. Interesting enough, though, this one, you only get it equal to your proficiency bonuses. It's an interesting ability. And I haven't used it often, because back when I was playing my other character, Lus, who was a ranger, it just narratively made sense for him to have been fighting beasts all his life. So I didn't decide to go down this route. I think it's a cool ability. I think it scales better, again, if you're going... What's interesting about it is there's two ways you play Ranger. There's the... Well, there's more ways you can play the Ranger, but there's two sort of like established ways. There's the normal sort of what you think of when you think of a Ranger, which is like a dude with a bow, shooting from behind the frontliners, doing damage. And there's the one they added for the book. I think it's called Drizzt, something like that. But he was a ranger, except he fought with two swords, and so they just made that part of the ranger. With that one, with this thing, you get your attack. You do your first attack, you get an extra d4 damage. You do your second attack, you don't get the d4 damage. So it doesn't seem as good with that one. You're still getting the d4, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't really scale with the sword, which is interesting. Whereas I feel like this is more for the ranged combatants, because also when you're at range, you're less likely to get hit. You're less likely to lose concentration. My problem with this is it kind of stops you. I don't know actually with the wording. I'd have to look up in more detail, but I'm not sure if you can concentrate on a spell while doing this. Because it says in brackets as if you were concentrating on a spell. But is that just supposed to be like just information about how that's how you lose concentration, as if you're concentrating on a spell? I think if I'm reading it correctly, you can't be casting Hunter's Mark when you have this. And that's a huge negative, in my opinion. Because Hunter's Mark is kind of the bread and butter of a ranger. And I think it's just better than this, because you can move it around. Next is a Natural Explorer. So in conclusion to this, I don't know if I like this ability. I think it makes you better in combat, but you lose a lot of like narrative utility. But one of my biggest problems with Ranger isn't here with this one, which is you look at this and you're like, oh cool, I can specialize in these people. But what it actually means is if you're not fighting what you've chosen, this ability may as well not exist. Whereas no matter what you're fighting, this ability exists, which is notable in this situation. And it's the same with this one as well. Look at that fucking segue, so good. Natural Explorer. Very similar to the Favored Enemy. It's kind of like just Favored Enemy, but for environments. You choose one of your favourite terrains. Bunch of them here. This one's the only one I think is really notable, because in my opinion, this one takes up a heck of a lot more space than every one of these ones combined. Because this one is effectively... Underdark is effectively just a second world underground. Also, you probably don't want to be taking this if you're not doing an Underdark campaign. But if you're in that terrain, if you've been travelling in it for an hour or more, difficult terrain doesn't slow your group down. I don't know how much that's coming up, But then again, a lot of the two DMs that I have don't really do traveling as a concept, and that's not me getting at them. Kind of hard because I'm pretty sure that one of them is the only person watching at the moment. Um, but it's just not a part of our games because we kind of consider it boring. I mean, we are. I'm right though, Zach. Right? We don't do it, and it is to us boring. It doesn't traveling just doesn't seem to have any interest to us. It might come up a bit in whatever in the campaign we're doing with the other DM if it even happens, frankly. But this will never come up for us, really. You just can't get lost. Probably doesn't come up either, because frankly, if we're getting lost in our campaigns, a lot of the almost always it's cause of magical means. When you're engaging in an activity while traveling, you may alert to danger. That may come up because, like, we could be foraging for. I can see yourself foraging for stuff, but because we don't really do. Let me rephrase this because I'm just going to keep ending it with, but we don't do this. If you were playing a game, I could see this one coming up. And I could see this one coming up if your DM once knows that they're going to do that kind of campaign and know you have that ability. Foraging in a situation where you have to keep food will come up. If you're traveling alone, you can move stealthily. I think this one would come up more. I've seen this come up maybe once in something I've watched, and it is quite good. When you forage, you find twice as much. That might come up again if you're doing food. A lot of people don't track food. They more just say, yeah, you have enough. Or they bank you for how much you would have had. This, I think, is the best ability. I think this one will come up more than all the others. Just knowing the size of what you're tracking can mean that you can be the difference between a death or not, right? Because if you're tracking something and you're like, we're like a level 4 party, we could probably take a couple goblins, and then your ranger's been tracking for an hour trying to find them, and he says, hey, you know how we thought it was a couple of goblins? Well, it's not a couple of goblins, it's 50 goblins. And it's not just goblins, there's also a couple of trolls there. And it's like, oh, well then we're not fighting that. And that's just stop you from dying. A possible wipe. This is the one they had to replace it. Now, I vastly prefer this ability to the Favoured Foe ability. And I think you can choose just to have this one. Yeah, you definitely can. So this one is instead going, don't choose a terrain. Screw the terrains, I don't care about terrains. You get instead, if you are travelling in the wilderness, you gain the canny ability. Actually, you just because you are this, you gain the canny ability, which is just skill proficiency and effectively expertise, but not. And you get additional languages. So it's a bonus, and the reason I like this more than I like Favoured Foe is only because it's replacing an ability I just don't think ever comes up. And this ability, I don't think has very many narrative exploits, well as this ability, I could see coming up as a story arc. That's it. It's my personal opinion on the whole thing, but that's really it. Fighting styles. Now, fighting styles, again, as I have said with the Paladin, and I said with the Fighter, they're really good. They're little things that allow you to customize your guy a bit. It's not It's not enough to be its own thing, but it's really good. Archery. Archery is probably the most commonly taken one. Archery is just a flat bonus, frankly. And if you're playing the ranged version of it, you could probably get to pick that. Blind fight I talked about before. Blind fighting, I think it would actually come up. I have never taken it before. Defense, it might come up. Probably won't though. My guess is this ability, the Druidic Warrior, based on the fact that Blessed Warrior was unique to Paladin, is probably unique to Ranger. Having a couple of cantrips isn't bad. I think it just very rarely will come up. Almost certainly you're just taking utility. This, again, this one, if you're planning on playing just like a one weapon fighter, well, ranger, but like just using one weapon, it's okay. You could use a shield, but I've never seen a sword and shield build before for a ranger, so I don't know how good it is. This one's just funny. I've never seen someone build around throwing weapons, but it sounds hilarious. And this one's the Drizzt one, probably the second most likely to take. Spellcasting. Now it's important to mention, I'm going to keep remembering to do this, is the spell list you get. It's quite important actually when it comes to Ranger, more than most classes. Very similar to Paladin in this aspect, if it would load, in the sense that it has a lot of buffs to itself, but more specifically, it has less buffs for its weapon than the Paladin does, and more debuffs to the opponent. And by debuffs, I don't mean the generic way you do debuffs, where it's like, I've lowered your ability to do stuff. It's more the, I've put something on you, and because that thing's on you, I can do more damage to you. I'm more talking, really, about one major ability that they have, and it's this spell. The spell that I think almost every Ranger has, and it's kind of so synonymous with Ranger that in the Unearthed Arcana, it's just a base part of their class now. They have buffs to this now. Hunter's Mark. Also the reason why Favoured Foe is a bit iffy. Oh, you can take it as a Vengeance Paladin. That's kind of cool. You choose an opponent within 90 feet. You stick this on them. They can't see it, but until the spell ends, you just deal an extra d6 damage whenever you hit them. And this one, notably, doesn't say on your first attack, which just means it's better for the 2-weapon one, even at the start. And eventually just becomes better for the for the bow person. Later on, though, I will admit, Favoured Foe, once it hits 14th level, and that's literally 14th level, it's better if you only have one attack, but you won't only have one attack. So, it's not that good. This is just better Favoured Foe. The only problem with it is that you'll be using a spell slot, and that's literally it. So in an attrition like dungeon, where you're not getting a lot of like short or long rests, there is an argument to say Favoured Foe's better, but I don't know. I don't personally think it's that good. As you can see here, loads of things to defend yourself. Bits of healing. Healing's always good to have. So having just another person in your party that can heal. Like, I wouldn't have this as my healer. If this was my only healer, I'd be a bit worried. But it's as good as like an off healer. A lot of crowd control, which it sort of gets from Druid. I think that's the biggest difference between, going back to Druid again, the biggest difference between Druid and Cleric is that I feel like Clerics get more access to more healing, whereas Druids get access to a lot more crowd control, and because Ranger is kind of just like a half fighter, half druid, you can see that in its spell list. Entangle, Spike Growth, both of them are there to put on the board and effectively go, everything in here, you're going to have a harder time leaving. Whether it's difficult terrain, whether it's you're restrained, whether it's you take damage every time you move. It also has access to a decent amount of AoE, which is surprising for it being a half-caster. One of the optional rules, you can use a Druid Focus. Big fan of that, because it's just another way you can narratively do your character and still go, hey, it's in the rules. Now, a while back, I said, I think this ability is the worst ability. I think I was lying there, because I forgot its other ability because it was so bad. And that's this. Primeval Awareness. Primeval Awareness is strictly worse Divine Sense. That's it. It's just not good. You can just sense that things are present within a mile. You can't sense oh, by the way, it's 6 miles if it's your favourite terrain. I don't know how that works if your favourite terrain doesn't last 6 miles. But that's beside the point. I can tell you, now, we're in this forest. Say it's my favourite terrain. I go up to you guys and go, hey, I just used Primeval Awareness. There's a dragon within 6 miles. Cool, where is it? Good question. Cool, I mean, it's a good thing that ability doesn't cost you anything. No, it cost me a spell slot. What? Yeah, it cost me a hunter's mark, effectively. It's so stupid. It's a bad ability. And just for that, this ability is amazing. Because it's not Primeval Awareness. If you've been in a situation where Primeval Awareness has actually helped you, I don't believe you. That's how much it doesn't help you. If you use that and it actually helped you, you are lying to me. The optional for it, effectively is the same thing. I thought it had the same name actually until I looked a bit more here, but it's just Primal Awareness instead of Primeval Awareness. Just gives you a bunch of spells you can use. You can cast one of them for free. That's decent, because A, they're utility, and B, it's not Primeval Awareness. I'm sorry, it's just a bad ability. It's so bad. Ability skill improvement, again, not going to talk about it. Martial versatility, it's amazing, I won't talk about it. Extra attack, amazing, not going to talk about it. This is decent. If you're in a situation where you didn't ask the DM about, hey, what? For one, you took the favorite terrain thing. And two, you were like, I didn't ask my DM what kind of terrain would be most common in this world, and I didn't ask the DM what kind of enemies would be fighting. If you get to this point, at 6th level, you can now go, okay, well, we're fighting a heck of a lot in Arctic, and we're not even close to beating the big bad that lives in the Arctic. So I'm going to take favourite terrain Arctic. That's helpful. Or you are like, hey, I chose oozes because I'm an idiot and watched somebody on the stream talk about how oozes will almost never come up and decided to pick it. And we've only really been fighting undead because the big bad is a lich. I think I'm going to take favourite enemy undead because narratively it makes sense. They even say it here. Reflect on what you've been fighting. Great advice, honestly. Or if you're taking Deft Explorer, which I do recommend because it's just really better in my opinion, you get an extra walking speed. Extra 5, you will be surprised how much that comes up. A lot of humanoid enemies will probably only have 30 feet of movement unless they're like grossly mutated. But like the average person has 30 feet of movement. So having 35 feet of movement, that little bit does help you. 8th level, Landstride. This is when you're getting to the point where I haven't actually really looked at them. Starting at 8th level, moving through non-magical terrain costs no extra movement. That will come up occasionally. I mean, at this level, and later than this level, you will come up with more and more stuff where anytime you're dealing with difficult terrain, it's probably a spell or it's a magical effect of some capacity. But it will come up. You can pass through non-magical plants without being slowed by them, and without taking damage for if they have thorns or spines or similar hazards. I don't know how much that's coming up. I'm racking my head around when I've ever seen in anything I've watched or anything I've been in a situation where there's just a bunch of flowers in the way and the flowers have thorns and it's difficult terrain, and that's been the thing that stopped us. The second ability, in addition, you have advantage on saving throws against plants that are magically created or manipulated to impede movement. That will come up if you are fighting a lot of stuff that is nature related. It'll come up a couple of times if you're dealing with just spellcasters a lot. Entangle's a pretty popular spell. It slows whoever you're fighting down to the point where they can't, get closer to you. And maybe this is cast by maybe you've got a druid in your party, right? And you decide I'm gonna go the build of Dritz build. I think he's Dritz. I don't know his actual name. And I'm gonna go 2 weapons. I'm gonna go in there with my 2 short swords. I'm gonna dice up the enemy, and I'm gonna be really fast because I was smart and I took the one that wasn't favoured terrain. It feels like I'm really going at favoured terrain, but it's not a great ability. My friend is like, there's a bunch of goblins coming after us. My friend puts down Entangle, and it's like, cool, they're entangled now. And you're like, well, I can't do anything. Sure, I've got a bow, but I'm not supposed to be using the bow. I want to be a melee fighter. And then you go, oh, hold on a second. I could go into that entanglement. I have advantage on the saving throw to get restrained. And if I succeed on that, which I probably will, because I'm very dexterous and I have advantage, I can move around in it as if it's normal terrain. That would be interesting. That might come up, except for that last part, because actually I just read it, and because it's magical, you wouldn't be able to move in it in normal terrain, but you'd at least be able to difficult terrain around, I guess. The extra 5 movement isn't helping you because it would be halved and rounded. I don't think it would actually help you in any capacity, but there is a situation where this comes up. Hide in plain sight. Starting at 10th level, you can spend 1 minute creating camouflage for yourself. You must have access to all this stuff that you probably would if you're in the forest or in any sort of natural environment. Once you're camouflaged, you can try pressing yourself against a solid surface, tree, wall, yep. Plus 10 stealth check as long as you remain without moving or taking action. That could come up in an ambush. It will come up rarely, but when it comes up, you will look like a badass. Because you'll be sitting there, covered in like snow, waiting for the enemy to come past. They'll be like, haha, I have like a really high perception score, and passively I can see anybody that has a lower than a 30 in their stealth or something. Or like I do a perception check and I roll a 32, and you're like, well, good thing that I have a really high stealth check. I took this. I took where is it? I took Deft Explorer. They asked me for a skill proficiency. I chose stealth. I doubled it. I have plus 10 to my roll. I rolled a 19. So my stealth is like 30, 35 or something. So you can't see me. And then you ambush them and like, oh god. Like that will come up. DM, obviously, if your DM put it in. But that's always assumed that you got. I'm assuming you've got a nice DM that looks at your abilities and puts situations in where you can use them. I'm basing it off my experience, effectively. Alternatively, if you don't like hide in plain sight, maybe it just doesn't make sense for your character. You can go for this one, which is a bit more magical. So if you're trying to be less magical, maybe you don't take this one. As a bonus action, you magically become invisible. Along with equipment and stuff. You effectively cast invisibility. Thing is with invisibility, is if you look at it base, it doesn't say there that base, if you do an attack, you cancel the invisibility. Now, I'm pretty sure the invisibility spell says that, but I don't know if the invisibility condition does. If it allows you to attack, this ability is pretty damn good. Because it just means you've given yourself like people disadvantage to attack you. So I can see that being used. I think of the optional features, this one is the closest to being just your choice. One of them is not more powerful than the other, to the point where taking one is just naturally giving you a huge debuff. So I think this one's just your opinion, honestly. Improvements to Natural Explorer, again, if you've moved to another terrain and you're like, God, I really wish I had favourite terrain for that, so that ability did something. There, you can take it. Alternatively, if you've gone for Deft Explorer, you get this action that is kind of like the thing that Fighter gets, where it can heal itself, except it's 10 hit points, and it's less than the Fighter would even starts with, because I think it might be a D10. You do get your Wisdom modifier, so it could be higher, but you can do it equal to your bonus equal to your proficiency bonus, and it's a bonus. It is an action. It's not bad. You might do it before a fight. This ability that could come up. I quite like that ability because it just means that you get less exhausted than everyone else, which gives you a proper both a narratively cool thing and also something that you have against enemies, which is quite cool. I quite like that. Subclasses will be another time. Ability skill improvements are just basic. Vanish. You can use a hide action as a bonus action. Something that the rogue gets instantly, really. But it's good to have. Never bad. Also, you can't be tracked by non-magical means. The problem with this one is at 14th level, anything that's tracking you is tracking you via magical means. That's my opinion, but I feel like it's true. See, once you're getting past, in my opinion, 12, 13, past level 12 and 13, I just assume that anything that says doesn't work, it only works on non-magical stuff, will almost never come up. in my opinion, because almost anything you're fighting will be magical at that point. Favoured enemy increasing, not bad. Every time you get a little bit another language, another time you could take the ooze. Don't know why you'd ever do it, but you could. Oozes almost never come up. I've never seen an ooze final boss. They've only been like a gimmicky thing in one dungeon, probably. Subclass feature, ability skill improvement, fell senses. 18th level, you gain preternatural senses that help you fight creatures you can't see. When you attack a creature you can't see, your inability to see doesn't pose disadvantage, so you effectively can see them. You're also aware of any creature within invisible creature within 30 feet of you, provided they aren't hidden from you and you aren't blinded or deafened. It kind of gives you a sort of weak blind sense. Effectively. They don't say blind sense, but it's kind of blind sense. Which could come up. I don't know how much it does come up. But then again, I don't know. It's a bit of a balance when it comes to giving your bosses access to invisibility and other abilities like that. But it might come up. Foe Slayer is the last capstone ability, and let's see if it's decent. I don't really know what this one is. Once on each of your turns, wisdom modifier to attack, roll, or damage. Making a favoured enemy. It's okay. Not great. It's much better if you've taken favoured foe, because you can just make something your favoured foe. But even at this final level, favoured foe is doing a D8, right? And it's the first time you hear an attack. So if you hit with more than one attack, Hunter's Mark is better. Because 2d6 is better than 1d8. I feel like there must be something I'm missing. Because this, to me, seems only good when you're out of spell slots that you can realistically use. Even with this bonus, I don't know if it's that good. Do you go for what would be... How many attacks would you have at this point? You'd have one extra attack. Okay, so you'd have 2 attacks. Do you go for 2 attacks that if they hit, do a d6? Or do you go for 1 attack? Oh no, I guess it would be... Yeah, do you go for 2 attacks that if they hit, you do an extra d6? Or do you go for 2 attacks that if one of them hits, you'll do a d8, but the other one won't get it? But you can add your wisdom modifier to your to hit or to your damage. Now, at that point, Hunter's Mark does fall off. But I don't think I'm making that decision if it's just a d6. So I wouldn't do it if I got this ability at 6th level. And I don't think I should be making my character assuming I'll make it all the way to here. To 20th. I don't know. That's a bit of an iffy ability. Overall, Ranger. It's alright. To me, it's like it does a similar thing to the Paladin. It's a half caster. It's sort of effectively half of a druid. While as the Paladin's half of a cleric. Differences with this one is... Obviously, it needed this upgrade to it. And although some of the upgrades are decent, I think Paladin just takes it slightly. But it is a lot better now. A lot better. And its subclasses are on the same level of like giving you stuff to do as the Paladin does. I quite like it. I had quite a lot of fun playing Lus, my ranger. And not just because I fucking loved the character, but also its abilities. I never felt like I was in a situation in combat where I wasn't doing enough damage. And we got to like, I think 8th level, maybe 7th. So it wasn't like we were low level. And there were casters in it. Next is Rogue. Rogue is a very interesting one. I, for the longest time, thought it was the strongest martial class. It's debatable. I think I've sort of conceded that um, it's actually the paladin that's stronger, just because you're not often in a situation where your battle will go long. But it's still one of my favorites. I'm actually playing one of them now, like in a campaign. Um, Expertise. This is why this one is one of the 2 jack of all trades, arguably 3 jack of all trade classes if you count the artificer, but this one does it very well. It is Artificer's okay at doing it. Bard and Rogue are great at it, and this one starts off really good. Expertise level 1, great ability. Just allows you to go these 2 skill proficiencies, and you can also count your thieves tools in this. I'm just going to double the proficiency bonus from them. It kind of can make stuff like stealth like effectively a guarantee that it's going to succeed. So it's a really good ability. I quite like it. Second ability, kind of the way the whole class is based around, is sneak attack. Sneak attack is a great ability. It's the best version of what you'll see in a lot of subclasses at level 3, where it's like put a little more damage on that attack. But as you can see here, sneak attack, it grows in strength over time with additional d6s. The whole stick with this is if you've got advantage on the creature, you get this sneak attack. But the thing is, you don't have to get advantage, because if you just had to get advantage, this ability would be much worse. You just have to have a friend that's near the target. That's it. And almost every one of these subclasses give you another way to get that sneak attack that isn't related to being near the person. For example, Swashbuckler, you just have to be in one-on-one with the person. That's huge. Thieves' Cant. This is a nice little ability. I didn't mention it when Druid came up, but they get a similar thing where they have like their own language. But this one will come up more because you're a rogue, and a lot of the time rogues are sneaky, and so you want this situation where you have a language that only really you and a select amount of people can figure out. It will come up. It will come up. It's a decent utility. It can get you access to information you wouldn't normally be able to get. Do not sleep on that on Thieves' Cant. Cunning Action. This is incredible, and this is the reason why your class will be able to rush around better than anyone else. Just allows you to bonus action, this would normally be an action, so you wouldn't be able to attack. There's bonus action, hide, disengage, dash. You can get out of the combat, you can get wherever you want in a really fast speed, and you can disappear from their sight, giving yourself advantage. Huge ability. I've watched several rogues. I've watched our rogue that didn't use this ability at all, did not hide when they should to get that advantage, and just kind of forgot the fact they had cunning action. They were not a good rogue. They did not do very well. It helped that they had a freaking OP magical ability at that point, but yeah, they weren't an incredible rogue. Subclasses are great. Not talking about them. This is the optional feature though. Bonus action. You effectively don't move that turn, but you get advantage in your next attack. This is huge. Because this goes... Hey, remember that thing I said before about having to have an ally near you? You don't if you don't move. The thing about this that doesn't really come across when you look at the name. You're like, okay, steady aim. It makes me think shooting, right? But it's not shooting. You can use this on your dagger. You could use this on your rapier if you're in melee. Huge ability, I love it. Arguably a bit overpowered, so I wouldn't be weirded out if somebody went, you're not allowed that optional rule. Ability skill improvement. Again, not talking about those. Uncanny dodge. This is a nice one. It's just like, hey, you're gonna hit me? I can see you doing that. Half your damage. Kind of a way to mitigate damage, because you're going to be somebody who will be going into fights. You've got a D8 health, which isn't bad, but I mean, there's some magic casters that will be backline that have a D8 health, and you could be going into the battle, especially the way I like to play it, which is a dagger and another dagger, and running into battle. This allows it so if you've used all your movement and you're stuck in battle and you can't disengage, or if you have to tank because there's more than one enemy and the other tank can't deal with it, you can sort of tank. Only works on one attack, so you better choose the right attack though, if you're getting attacked with multiple things. Expertise. Again, this is when you realise that you're going to become a jack of all trades. Whereas the bard will be good at everything a bit, you will be good at stuff to the point where it's almost impossible for you to fail good on like 3 things. But those 3 things you'll be the best at. And most of the time it's stealth, persuasion, a lot of the time, and sleight of hand. Oh, and thieves' tools. Evasion. Now, evasion's an interesting ability because it effectively says, it doesn't actually say this, but it effectively says any AoE, you take half damage from it, and if you succeed, you take no damage. Now, don't get me wrong, there are abilities that are AoEs that aren't dex saving throws. There's large scale ones that are to do with like manipulating the mind that are either wisdom or intelligence saving throws. You might get an AoE that's to do with poison. That might be con save. But the majority of AoEs that you'll see, your fireballs, your ice storms, your breath weapon on your dragon, all of them are dex saves. So this will almost always come across. Reliable talent. Now, remember before I said that you wouldn't be as good against... you won't be as good at just everything as the bard would be? This kind of changes it. I forgot about this ability. This effectively is almost exactly the same as what the bard gets, where it's like... Actually, I roll a 9 no matter. Sorry, I roll a 10 no matter. And if you have stealth expertise, that means you're guaranteed at most a 21, because you'll have a plus 11. It's insane. Blind sense, great ability. You saw it on the ranger, and it effectively said this, except it was I think it was bigger range, and it didn't technically say hidden. It just said invisible. But this one will come up, and it's kind of like an anti-rogue ability, which is quite interesting. Slippery Mind. This is interesting because it feels a bit out of place, but it makes sense that you've sort of compartmentalized your brain to the point where it's really, really hard to get into it. You've even locked away your brain from enemies. It's cool. It will come up if you're dealing with probably mind flayers, maybe other mind manipulating things like Fae and stuff. Political improvement, roguish archetype, same thing. This is very, very interesting. It will come up, and I know I say that for almost every ability now. It's kind of how I start every conversation now with these abilities, but I'm not kidding when I say this will come up. Because having advantage on you, it's freaking huge. Absolutely huge. Especially against big monsters. Because realistically, if you find a big bad, they're always going to hit you. And when there's situations where they don't hit you, it's huge. And this means that there's more of those situations. Finally, Stroke of Luck, the capstone ability. If you miss a target within range, you can turn it into a hit. If you fail an ability check, you can treat it as a 20. Every short rest. Incredible. This will come up when you need it to. It's a lot of situations you'll find yourself where you're like, this is probably when you use your inspirations, but you're like, I need this to succeed. I need to roll good here. I will use everything I have. And this goes, even if you use everything you have and you fail, nah, you didn't fail, you got 20. And when you're in a situation where you have to hit, like the boss is low on health, but all of you are almost dead, and you have to succeed, this ability will come up. And it will make everyone on your table cheer, like it's like you've won the lottery or something. Now, initially, those abilities, none of them are related to damage, and you're probably like, well, other classes gave you all these damage thing stuff. Aren't you worried that you're not going to scale on damage? Well, I said before that it was one of the most powerful martial classes, up there with Paladin, and it's because of this. As I said at the start, at this point in time, say you're level 20, you hit that boss that the Paladin's right next to, and not only do you do the damage from your probably magical weapons at that point, first attack, boom, extra 10d6. Good luck with that. You know, it's huge. Overall, Rogue, very, very good class. At this point in time, I don't feel 100% on the subclass I'm playing. It's like not a homebrew one, but like it's not an official one. And I'm not really good at using it, and I don't know how I feel about it. But because the Rogue is so good, it doesn't matter. I'm effectively just playing a Rogue with no subclass. And yet I still feel strong because of this ability. So, overall, really good class. The only problem that Rogue has is that it isn't a magic caster, and that can be solved if you take Arcane Trickster. You become a half caster, but still. The only problem with Rogue is that martial classes are just so much weaker. Sorcerer. Now, if you ask one of my friends, this is the class that shouldn't exist. I disagree. I think narratively, there's a lot more you can do with this one with Wizard. I kind of like to have these questions that you have to ask with your class. And this one, and the one that comes after it, Warlock, are the ones that have these kinds of questions. To a certain extent, you have it with Cleric as well. But the biggest question with Sorcerer is, how did you get your powers? What's your bloodline? What's the blessing you got? How did these abilities come across? And the story of your character most of the time is, okay, that happened to you. How are you dealing with it? How are you embracing this power you have? I think it has a load of narrative fun to it. Now this D6, lower than the average. Now you're probably like, oh god, that's bad. But you're a magic caster, so you don't need to worry about it. Spellcasting. Now, if you look at their abilities, spellcasting stuff, realistically, what you see, not that much. Really. They're like a wizard, but they notably have less spells. There isn't much of a theme to them other than, like the wizard, there's a lot of damaging spells. And specifically with the sorcerer, not that much utility. A couple of bits of utility, but it's effectively wizard light. It's wizard, but it's got a lot less spell variety. And you're probably like, that's not great, but it has its own charm to it. That you'll find. This one, you get it at level 1, your subclass. Makes complete sense. It would be really weirded out if it didn't get its sorcerer subclass at level 1. Because if you got it at level 3, it wouldn't make any sense because it's supposed to be inherent to you. And your whole power source is supposed to come from it. Font of Magic. Now, this is where you start getting into the stuff that is kind of the main ability of sorcerers. So, Font of Magic is you get a wellspring of the sorcery points. Now, sorcery points, you get more and more of them as you go on. They don't go up by a huge amount, but they're effectively the same as key points in like how they go up. They max at 20, like key points as well. What they allow you to do is they allow you to do special things with your spells. They also allow you to create spell slots. This may come up. I find that like you'll see a lot with key abilities and subclasses, you'll find that the points do not add up to what you're getting. Now, I don't think I want to be paying an extra 2 sorcery points to get a first level spell slot, because that's effectively getting rid of my main ability, at least at the start at level 2, just get one extra spell slot. That's not fun, in my opinion. I like that it's there though, and I like that you can't get like 9th levels back. And initially, that's all you have. Later on, 3rd level, you get meta magic. Now, meta magic is the sort of the bread and butter I was talking about. I actually thought you got that at the same time, but I was wrong. You get it now. But you have access to all of these abilities that you can choose from. You can only choose 2 of them. I think you can change them when you level up, though. But these are all cool. Like, you have Careful Spell. You cast a spell that forces the other person to make a saving throw, spend an extra sorcery point, choose a number of creatures up to your charisma modifier, and you can just go, they succeed, right? So you go, I want to cast Fireball, and the GM goes, you do realise that you'd be casting Fireball with your 3 allies, like, right there in the middle of it. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to cast it carefully. And so you cast the Fireball, you choose your 3 allies that you don't want to take as much damage from it. They're still going to take damage, but they won't take as much. And narratively, it's like the fireball sort of curves around them and hits them, and then the enemies take like full damage, or maybe half, depending on if they succeed the saving throw. But you know your allies will take half guaranteed. It's good. I kind of wish you could, instead of it saying, I feel like this could have been balanced by, instead of it saying they automatically succeed, they automatically take no damage. But who am I to talk about that kind of stuff? There's Distance Spell. It allows you to just shoot it from further. That may come up if you're in a very, very big map. I find a lot of the time though that spells, I never really have a problem with distance when it comes to spells. It's always more so like what spell I'll do. Like a lot of spells have 60 feet, 90 feet range, and you won't find a lot of huge spells. You won't find a lot of spells that have, and maps where the map doesn't allow you to cast your spell almost immediately. But maybe that's just me. This might come up. I don't know if I take it immediately, but to each their own, right? Extend spell. Again, one that might not come up, but I guess I could see it on long-term spells. Like if you're trying to locate somebody and you're like, we're not going to find them in like within the time limit, just doubling it seems great. Heighten spell's quite interesting. It's the first one that I've talked about at this moment that you can cast for more than one sorcery point, and you spend 3 sorcery points, and it just makes it so that they're less likely to succeed. I could see that coming up in like a big moment where you're like, I have to succeed in this. I have to make them fail in this. Quicken spell, I think, is the one that I feel like almost everyone will take. It's this one and twin spell that I think I'd always take. But quicken spell's like, you have a spell that casts you need an action for. Spend 2 sorcery points. You don't need an action, which means you can technically you could dash with your action to just get out of there or do anything with it. Subtle spell I could see coming up in utility stuff. It just allows you to ignore the somatic and verbal components, which people don't talk about as much. Is that you can't really cast a spell in front of somebody without them knowing you're doing something, because you're sitting there and you're either saying like magical words, or you're doing these weird like hand signals, and realistically they'd go, "What are you doing? Like, why are you doing that?" Finally, twin spell. Now you can see with twin spell that they give examples of all these spells you can't use it on. That's kind of important because I definitely made I did not understand that at the start. But twin spell is the most unique in my opinion, because it allows you to go, this ability targets one person, nah, it targets 2 people. That's huge. There's restrictions on it, obviously, as there's always going to be, because this is such a powerful ability. But I find a lot of the time you're not using this on attacking people, you're using it on buffing your friends. If you cast haste, and then you twin it, and cast haste on your other friend, that's huge. That might change the course of a battle. Here's 2 of the optional ones they've added. I haven't actually looked at these yet. If you would miss, you can roll again. Not bad. It means that you can't, at least later on, you're less likely to fail on like a big spell, because that can be so annoying. If you're casting your big like single target attack on the enemy, like you're like, I'm gonna do Ray of Frost, but I'm gonna for some reason cast it. No, I'm gonna do Chromatic Orb, and for some reason I'm casting it 9th level, and you missed. That feels horrendous. So just being able to go, actually spend 2 sorcery points, re-roll that, I hit, I actually do something with that spell now. Transmute spell might come up. The problem with transmute spell is you have to know for a fact that what you're fighting is weak to it, or else this spell feels useless. And I don't find myself in a lot of situations where I go into a battle knowing what the weakness of the enemy is. There's exceptions, of course. If you go into a battle against a fire elemental, obviously you won't use fire. This spell allows you to cast Fireball and then just go, but it does cold damage. And there's a chance that actually, does more damage. It's just another one of the versatility things. I always love versatility. The fact that versatility's here is great, in my opinion. Just allows you to do more. Great. Magical guidance. I haven't actually looked at this one yet. You tap into the wellspring of magic, trying to conjure success from failure. When you make an ability check that fails, you can spend one sorcery point to reroll it. Cool. Out of more utility, out of battle kind of stuff that you can use. Great. That'll go alongside subtle spells, stuff you can do outside of combat to do cool stuff. Subclass, ability skill improvement. You get an extra meta magic option. I think my problem with meta magic, and it's kind of my problem with key stuff as well, is two-pronged really. One, I feel like all of the abilities are either overcosted or they don't do enough. And two, I feel like you don't get access to enough of the points for it to matter. Now they're pretty interlinked, honestly. I feel like, and they've done this actually with Unearthed. It's one of the few things I like about the Unearthed Arcana, like updated 5th edition, is they buffed almost all of these except for Twin Spell, which was always the best. And by doing that, they've sort of solved half of the problem, in my opinion. And they gave Sorcerer a couple more abilities that were okay. I didn't really like them. But that's sort of the biggest problem I have with meta magic. Like, inherently, sorcerers are weaker than wizards, in my opinion. The difference you have with a sorcerer, though, is it has something extra that the wizard doesn't get, and it's actually the fact that it's unique. I can play a sorcerer who is like a dragon bloodline, and I'm this tanky damage dealer that can eventually breathe fire and, you know, take on the attributes of a dragon. And then this other person could play like a clockwork soul, and they're like manipulating fate and making it so that you like advantages and disadvantages don't exist, and they're using like all of these sort of shenanigans. Whereas if I'm playing a wizard, I feel like there's less uniqueness to it. Because no matter what school I choose, I don't think it gives you enough uniqueness. But that's just me. I feel like I've always gone towards Sorcerer because I like the like, to me, Wizard is vanilla, and Sorcerer is something worse than vanilla, but at least it's different. You know, it's at least you can customize it a bit. And the final ability, effectively just very, very similar to the monk one, except I think worse, because the monk one is just if you start the combat without any key points, you get key points. It's fine. 4 isn't that much, though, which is a problem. Overall, Sorcerer, I've played a Sorcerer before, but it's a bit iffy because we were using the optional, like, hardcore rules with it. I quite like it. It's a magic caster, so as much as people will probably say that Sorcerer is one of the weaker magic casters, it can still hold its own because it's a magic caster. I feel like they need to do more with meta magic, and maybe giving... I think they've started doing this a bit with the newer subclasses, but giving meta magic that is specific to subclasses would be interesting. Buffing them and making them more cool and unique would be good. But yeah, overall the Sorcerer's fine. No major problems with it. Warlock. Now, if you had asked a decent amount of my friends, I think they'd say that Warlock narratively has the most weight to it. Like, narratively, it has the most you can do with it. I talked about it briefly when we were talking about the cleric, and how you kind of have this relationship with the DM where you make a god with the cleric. But it's more so with the warlock. The warlock, you are, with the DM, making a second character. And this second character, realistically, if you want it to be a good warlock, should be as detailed as your actual character. Because they effectively are a big part of your character. It's why I really, really like the warlock. Haven't played one before, but I'd love to. Pact Magic. Your pact gives you access to a decent amount of spells. Now, I won't be able to do Warlock as well as I can really do it because of the fact that inherently the Warlock, a lot of it comes from the subclass. A lot of the flavour does at the very least. But spells, right, the spells you get access to. Now Warlock's a bit interesting. Because its spell list is, I don't think it's particularly unique, but what it does have is, as you can see here, you don't get a lot of spell slots. It's unique in this sense because sure, you don't get a lot of spell slots, but you get them back as a short rest. So you get access to them. You get that if you expend them, you get access to them a lot quicker than other classes. And they do go up in strength. It is a half caster. I don't know how much I agree with it being a half caster. I wish it was more than a half caster, because I mean, it's not as if you're doing something light to learn about it. It's not like Paladin and Ranger where the main part of it is your martial ability, and then you also have this magic on the sideline. You are literally making you're selling your soul most of the time for this power. Why are you selling your soul for less power than somebody who trained to do it? I don't know. It always bothers me. But you can get up to 5th level, but you only ever get 4 slots. This, especially in our games, has been a huge problem. Because we don't do short rests much. And with that, all the short rest specific abilities become they effectively say long rest. And if you take this spell, like the spell slots and spells you get, and you just change the word to, just get rid of this word that says short rest. This class is horrendous. Power level wise. Spells it gets, they're decent. A lot of manipulation, a lot of summoning, a lot of damage. You get arguably the best spell, get best cantrip in the game. Arguably, this is as much part of Warlock as Hunter's Mark is for Ranger. It does force damage. It has a really really high range, higher than a lot of cantrips. It does D10, which is huge. Every Warlock probably has that, unless you're specifically trying not to have it. This is a charisma person. Makes sense in my opinion, charisma based. Because the whole shtick is you've made a deal. Deals you have to be quite charismatic for. Has a D8, which is pretty decent when you compare it to the Sorcerer, but it's kind of the standard. You'll see why it's got a higher health pool hit die when you look at the invocations and the pacts. Yeah, it's fine. Patron, huge thing. As I said before, I've sort of gone through that already. Eldritch Invocations. Now this is an optional feature. This is not an optional feature. This is a big part of them. I really like this ability. I wish this was a bigger thing. Honestly, I wouldn't mind if this was a thing more with the other classes. Obviously not Eldritch Invocation, but something like this, where there's a list of abilities you can choose from, and there's level requirements on them, so you can take higher level abilities. It's really cool, and all of these do a lot of things. A lot of people take Agonizing Blast because it makes the best cantrip even better. But a lot of these do stuff like this, where you can just cast a spell. Not a particularly high level spell, but you can cast a spell. Most of them are utility, but this one happens to just be combat related. Whenever you want, over and over and over again. Which is kind of huge. Kind of just a thing you don't get with anyone else. A lot of them are related to this pact. So before talking any more about that, the Eldritch Invocations, let me just go over the pacts for you. Pacts of Blade. Battle of the Blade is one that you can take. Gives you a blade. It's kind of like it's connected to you. You can make a connection with it. Makes it magical. That's kind of huge. And you can sort of summon it into your hand. Very huge. Effectively taking this pact is going down the route of turning your half-caster from being a ranged damage dealer into being a melee damage dealer. A lot of people will say this is the only viable way to go, because it makes you very powerful and it makes you feel like you're doing stuff more, because you don't have to rely on spells. Because the problem with Warlock is after you've cast your spells, because you only have 2 of them at the start and the most you ever get is 4, in a long battle you will very quickly run out of spells. And I tell you what, when you're a magic caster and you run out of spells, you just have a horrendous time. You kind of feel like what a Martial class has, where they're just casting a cantrip over and over again, and it's like, you got access to a load of cantrips, sure, but you probably only have one damaging one. And so you're just like, poison spray, firebolt. It's boring. But if you have this, at least you can go into there and fight. Back to the chain. This one is a bit weird, because inherently, it's just a Find Familiar spell. Except you get access to a bunch of these special forms. Imp's quite interesting. Polymorph into stuff, that can be quite useful. Devil Sight can be quite useful. It's probably not that good in battle, but it's quite interesting. Same with the Pseudo Dragon, limited telepathy. They all have special abilities that make them better than just a Find Familiar. You effectively get a better Find Familiar. And this one can turn invisible. Utility wise, that can be used occasionally. It's not great, but it's not bad. Pact of the Talisman, nobody knows why they added it. It's not great. There's not much to say about it. You can add like a D4 to ability checks. But for such a major part of the class, it really falls behind the others. And it definitely falls behind the Blade. This one, Pact of the Tome, is better utility than this one. Because you get access to a load of cantrips from other other classes, right? Gives you all access to a load of stuff. And the stuff you could do with this with invocations is even cooler. And now that I've talked about those, you can look at these. Like, all these ones that have prerequisites for the pact, you will be surprised at how cool they are. Like this one, just instead of sleeping, you just read a book. This one, you can start taking first level spells that have rituals. You can start doing rituals effectively. It's just a cool ability. And narratively, it's so cool, because you're like, oh, I'm writing down these abilities that I have taken from looking at the people I have fought. This one just allows you, because you know about chains, you can just cast Hold Person at will. That's huge. Hold Person's not a bad spell. This one gives you a pseudo smite like a paladin. Like the pact ones are really cool, and a lot of them just narratively have a lot of flavor to them as well. Like being able to send stuff and just write people's name in them in the book to do it. It's just narratively so cool. This one, just allowing you to bring people back to one if you've written on the book, is so cool. It's like you've made a contract with them. This it comes up occasionally, right? And this is huge. Like it bumps your sword up to being like a +1, and you can use more stuff. In conclusion, the Eldritch Invocations to me are like feats, where they are such a cool way of flavoring your character, and that's why I'm like, I want them to be a sort of effect to be similar in all classes, because it just allows you to sort of make the class your own. And if you have 2 warlocks in your group, it's the class that, if you have 2 of them, they will be the most different, because their patrons will be different, which mean they're like their like goals will be different, the Eldritch Invocations will be different, so their combat will be different, their packs will be different, so their style of fighting will be different, and the out of combat stuff will be different. It's really good, like a lot of little things. Versatility, great, and even better on the Warlock, because there's so many different things you can change. Another patron ability, another ability score, another patron ability. Mystic Arcanum is kind of the only thing left that they get. This is the sort of the kind of like the thing they give the Warlock to sort of compensate for the fact that you're falling behind all the other magic casters. Where it's like you choose a spell from this list, a list of spells that you wouldn't normally get because you don't normally get to 6th level, and some of them are really, really cool. And you go, cool, that spell, you can cast it without expending a spell slot, because you wouldn't have a spell slot. You can do it once per long rest, and this keeps getting higher and higher level. Like this one, it goes, hey, you got 1 6th level, why not take a 7th level? And this one goes, why you got 7th level, why not an 8th? And this one goes, why you got an 8th, why not a 9th? I think it's with the 9th one, that means you got the same amount of 9th level spells as any of the other classes. So it's huge. And this, the capstone ability, drawing your reserve power when entreating your patron to regain expended. You can spend 1 minute to regain all the expended spell slots from your pack. That's great, because this will get a heck of a lot more use in my campaigns, in the campaigns I'm in, than having a short rest be a thing. So that's really cool. Overall, I've been very quick when going through Warlock, and that's not because Warlock is bad. It's on the contrary. Warlock is great, but you won't see it in the abilities as much. You'll see it in the Eldritch Invocations a decent amount. You'll see it in the Patron's abilities, but that's it really. The real good part of Warlock comes from the fact that you make this second character that's kind of like your character, but also the DM's character, and it becomes such a narrative part of your character, and it can be, you can do so many story things with it. You can have situations where you're against what your patron wants. You can have a situation where the patron decides to help you because you're in a situation where you're dealing with somebody they particularly hate. You can have conversations with your patron that can be such narrative cool bits in it that it's such a cool narrative class. The problem with it is it isn't very good in combat. And Dungeons and Dragons is, even though it inherently seems like a combat-based thing, it's about 50-50 combat roleplay. And so if you're not that good in combat, you're not that good for 50% of the part of the game. And when I say not that good, I don't mean you're not meta, you're not like the most powerful. I mean you feel like you're doing nothing. And the problem with this is you're a magic class, unless you go Pact to the Blade, and you specifically go like Hexblade or something, you are a magic class that has like 10% of the spell slots that any other magic class gets, but none of the really good features that a half-caster gets. Overall, love the Warlock. Very little complaints about the narrative part of it. Next is Wizard, and I'm biased against Wizard because it's my second least favourite class. Because Bard, I just don't like Bards, and then Wizard is close second. It's like the Fighter, except for magic. And that just doesn't, it's the vanilla, right? You have a load of these subclasses, all of them related to the schools of magic. Some of them have really cool abilities. Like there's one of them that puts up a barrier. There's one of them that allows you to teleport you and another person if they're willing. There's another one that allows you to effectively like be a frontline fighter with an extra AC and cast spells as bonus actions. But I just don't like it. I'm being honest. I look at it and go, yeah, there's all these cool abilities that you can get with the wizard, but I can get all of those abilities. Well, not all of those abilities, but equivalent on those abilities with with the cleric, with the druid, with the warlock. Maybe not the warlock, but cleric and druid. Even to a certain extent, sorcerer. I can get those cool abilities plus more cool abilities plus. I lose out on a couple of spells that the wizard gets, because there's no one that's better at burst than the wizard. But I still get good, decent spells. You'll get most of the time you'd get spells from obviously your spell list, and also access to specific spells from your subclass. And so I never feel like I'm missing out on not having access to spells that wizards do. But I always feel like the wizard, I don't know, falls short for me. Got a D6 health, which again is another problem, because if you look at druid, D8. Look at cleric, D8. So even if, another reason why I won't pick it is that I just get a little bit more health with the others. Got a spell list, as I sort of mentioned before. It's girthy. It's wide. There's a lot of spells. The only stuff that they don't really have is healing. That's really it. If you wanted access to the most of the spell list, this is the way you go. All of these spells, they're really good at burst, they're really good at utility. They're decent at crowd control because they have access to all of those spells. You will probably, if you want to use a spell and it's not healing, you'll find it in a wizard. Now before, it used to be the only intelligence class, but luckily with Artificer it's a little different. It's not great that you have your class is based around what is considered the worst attribute. That doesn't help you. So that's sort of another demerit with it. Ritual casting is very good. That can come up a lot. Arcane Focus is just normal. There's this whole thing about your spell book, and a lot of the time you'll find that if you lose your spell book, you lose all your work. That's a big problem with it. Is that like clerics, they get their stuff from the god. They never lose their spells. They might lose their catalyst, but they can, if they get a new catalyst, they have all their spells again. With this one, there's a strong part of like you've got to do a lot to get your spells back, and you've got to do a decent amount to get spells copied into it as well. Wizard has the biggest problem of being a money sink as well. In a party, you'll find that you'll get a lot of money. A lot of the time, you'll get like several hundred gold, right? And you'll be like, "Well, I've got so much money, I don't know what to do with it." And your wizard will be like, "I wish I had money. I spent it all on putting spells in my book. I don't get access to a lot of spells when I level up. Clerics do, druids do, sorcerers do, warlocks do, all the half-casters do. I'm stuck here trying to find spells to put in my book." Which can be a decent narrative experience of like the wizard going to a wizard school and going, "Hey, can I like buy some of your spells, please?" But it does mean that you're gonna have significantly less money than all of the other players. Only other person that has a money sink is if you are tracking arrows and you have somebody who uses bows. That's literally it. Arcane Tradition, that's your subclass. Cantrip formulas. Sure, that's fine. Long rest, change your cantrip. Cantrip versatility. That's fine. I love those abilities. Got ability skill improvement, ability skill improvement, ability skill improvement, subclass ability skill improvement, subclass ability skill improvement. You see what I meant when I said that it was the fighter but for spell casting? It gets nothing base for abilities, really. And that's a huge demerit to it. If I play my cleric, for example, I'm like, I get access to all these spells, plus channel divinity, which is cool, plus destroy undead. Like, plus divine intervention. Like at the end of this, I've got like 4 abilities I can do. If I go druid, I get access to wild shapes. If I go sorcerer, I get access to all that meta magic, even though I don't think it's great, it's more than nothing. Whereas this one is just abilities go improvement, subclass, abilities go improvement, subclass. And you're like, oh, well, the subclass gives you stuff. But so it does the same for all the other classes. So I don't know, I don't particularly like it. At 18th, which is so far ahead of all the others, like, it's 18th, you're almost at the end. You're fighting demigods and dragons and chosen champions of like maybe even archdevils, like low level archdevils can be at the level of fighting an 18th level party. It's not weird for somebody at 18th level to fight a CR20 if they have decent equipment. Spell mastery. You choose a first level wizard spell, a second level wizard spell. They're in your book. You can cast them at the lowest level without spending a spell slot. So you just get constant first and second level spells. But you're at the point where you have access to 9th. Like, it's cool, and I like it, because it means that instead of casting Firebolt, I can cast, like, Burning Hands, Chromatic Sphere. Like, that's cool. It's just you've waited all this time for an ability. And everyone else has gotten so many others. Signature spells. This is effectively spell mastery, except for 3rd level. Which is very cool. Wizard, at the end of the day, I've been really quick with Wizard. Mainly because the base Wizard doesn't get anything other than spells. But at the end of the day, I'm biased, obviously. But Wizard is not fun to me. It doesn't give me any interest because it doesn't have any flavour to it. Like, I know to a certain extent the character, the player's supposed to add the flavour, but I'm one of those people that I need something to push off of. I need something there that I can go, oh, I can use this I can expand on this, right? Like little hints of stuff I can use. So with Cleric, I always look at all of the gods, and if I find a god I find interesting, I go, okay, how would I make a character around that? With Warlock, whenever I think of like the powerful beings that exist in that world, I look them up and I talk with the DM and I go, okay, I want to make something like this, and that's my springboard of like how I make my character. With Sorcerer, similar thing. I look at all the different powerful races and I go, what kind of power would I have if I was if this thing blessed me, or this thing had blood, I had that bloodline in me, and how would it work for a character? And I use that as a jumping off point to make my character. I could keep going on, but like quickly, like Druid, I think of like, okay, major landmarks, major forests, major Arctic stuff. How would I make a character around that? Even it's true for all of them, except Wizard to me doesn't have that. Sure, I can think about like why I learned X and Y, but it just doesn't to me doesn't have that. It's not as much of a jumping off point for me. So I put this one pretty low. In terms of power level, it's pretty powerful. It's a magic caster, so it's always going to be powerful. So yeah, that's all of the classes at the moment. I'll do just, before I go, quick overview of them. TLDR, right? Artificer, love it, jack of all trades, got access to all the items, great ability, all of the subclasses are cool. Only problem with it is it doesn't fit to all of the campaigns you might be doing, because it's a bit sci-fi. Barbarian has the rage, all consuming. It has really nothing else. Reckless attacks there, but it's not really. It's just another part of rage. All the subclasses base it on rage, and it doesn't get access to anything really else other than that, and so it really falls behind in my opinion on it. Bard, another jack of all trades, has access to a lot of utility. I don't personally like it, but it's a really good class. All of the subclasses change it slightly, and it's overall just a good class. Cleric, love cleric. Each of these subclasses, even though there's so many of them, change it to the point where it becomes a new, like, kind of a new class. You can be heavy armor, you can be light armor, you can have healing heavy, damage heavy, you know, all that kind of stuff. Has access to a decent spell list, a lot of concentration spells, a lot of healing, really useful. Destroying Dead's almost useless, so I don't think that one's particularly good, but other than that, it's decent with the channel divinity and everything. Druid, great. Access to wild shape, gives you access to a bunch of utility stuff. The fine familiar things okay, but not great. All of the druid circles, especially the later ones and Moon, give you access to how to use the wild shape in a different aspect that makes it cool and unique. Yeah, really, really good. Not spells get access to very similar to cleric, except more crowd control. Great one, 10 out of 10. Fighter, the vanilla martial class. Difference between this and wizard is that you get access to decent subclasses that change your character, and a lot of ability skill improvements that allow you to get a load of feats. Fighting styles that change it up as well, and it has a couple of abilities that are decent, like action surge and second wind that will come up. Pretty decent, not my favourite martial class. Monk, decent. The key points add a decent amount of stuff to it. Being able to flurry of blows, step of the wind, and patient defense will come up a decent amount of time. You lose out a lot when you get to later levels because people just outscale you, including many martial classes. Stunning strike is insane to the point that people ban it, which makes sense because it can trivialize fights. The extra movement means you're allowed to move around a lot more. Overall, I really like it. Narratively, fuck, that scared the life of me. This Windows thing coming up. Narratively, I really like it. I think I put it up as like one of the best martial classes for narrative. A lot of utility in there as well, and a decent amount of the subclasses are decent except for 4 elements and Sun Soul in my opinion. Paladin, absolutely great. Get access to what the fighter has plus more really, except for the feats. Get a load of spells. You got the Divine Smite to do loads of damage. All of the different subclasses are cool that fundamentally change it, like the cleric does. Overall, one of my favourite martial classes. Ranger is okay. It used to be really bad. A lot of the optional features are good, except for a couple of them. Primeval Awareness is useless. That's why they got rid of it. A lot of your spells are based on putting stuff on the enemy. Hunter's Mark is really a really big part of it. If you don't like that, don't play a Ranger. Overall, there's a decent amount of narrative stuff with it. I'd put it a bit lower in my standings than stuff like Paladin and maybe even Fighter in terms of like my opinion of it, but I've played one and they're really fun. Rogue, you get access to sneak attack. You're probably one of the most powerful martial classes. A lot of the archetypes are really good and give you access to other stuff you can do, and also stuff to do sneak attack more. You got a lot of abilities go improvements. Although you don't get extra attack like all the other martial classes, you do get access to a lot of damage that you can do in one attack. Kind of the burst character of the martials. Very, very good, especially with the current actions to weave in and out. Other than the fact that martial classes inherently need buffs, no real buff needed to the rogue. Sorcerer, kind of wizard, but weaker, but with more uniqueness to it. I like it more narratively. It has access to meta magic that's a bit overcosted or underpowered, depending on where you want to do it. Subclasses are generally interesting. They change stuff up a bit. It's a magic class, so it'll be powerful. I put it up there as a decent narrative one. Warlock is the best narrative one in my opinion. You effectively make two characters. One's your patron, one isn't. One's your actual character. The subclasses add a lot to your character, so do the Eldritch Invocations that you can customize your character a lot with. The packs are really decent, except for Talisman, although Blade is considered the best one. Yeah, overall, I love it narratively. It's very weak compared to every magic caster, especially if you're like our group, who don't do short rests, because you don't really get access to a lot of what the character's good at. Overall, really like it. Wizard, it might be my least favourite class the more I've thought about it. It's like the fighter in the sense that you get access to a lot of stuff, but you're very generic, and a lot of your stuff is ability score improvements. The difference being is you don't get access to anything else other than ability score improvements, unlike the fighter that gets second wind and action surge. And also, I don't find any of the subclasses that interesting. You got a pretty weak health bar as well. Overall, I don't really like it. But if you wanted to play it, I won't hold you. It's just my opinion, right? Don't take it as like gospel. It is going to be very powerful because it's a magic caster and you get access to a lot of spells. Overall, in terms of my opinion on them, this is my least favorite magic class, and it might be my least favorite class. But yeah, I just thought I'd do the second part of this. I considered doing it like next week, but it was kind of just being on my mind, just thinking about it, so I thought I'd just get this over with. It's about the same amount of time as my last stream, so that's kind of good to keep like consistency, I guess. I kind of couldn't do more than this because my throat's starting to hurt, but anyway, that's the end of it.